everyone. Welcome to our webinar for Learning Through Languages. We are very happy that you and your students are participating in this wonderful language and research program. So we hope that, if you have questions, you will type them in the chat and just ask us anything as we go through the webinar today. We have two awesome presenters for you all, and they're going to give you lots of resources, ideas, strategies, teaching strategies about how to guide your students in the research process using materials in the target language, and ideas about how to help them to craft that research that research product that they are producing. So thank you again for joining us. Now we do have a couple PowerPoints that we will showcase during this webinar, and those are accessible to you through the participant portal. So I believe Noel is putting them up in the chat right now, and Emma Harvard also sent everyone an email with the links to the participant portal, and then the folder within that specifically called Research and Writing Resources. So please access that that folder, and we hope you guys will follow along, and you don't actually need to watch us the whole time. You can just look at the slides or put up both the video and the slides on your laptop. So so I'm going to introduce our speakers for today.
Emily, real quick, can you
Yes.
ask just to make sure people are connected? I only see one watching, just to make sure. If people, could we ask people to chat real quickly?
Yes, please. If you'll just send us a little line to tell us that you're here. It looks like we have one person right now, but we hope to have more. Do we have a chat coming, or a chat line coming up?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the link we sent. Let's see.
Just communicate with us. Feel free to communicate with us about if anything is working or not working, so we can make sure.
It looks like we have at
Everyone
least one
can
person.
access.
So.
Okay. All right, we'll keep going. So, all right. So our first speaker today is Dr. Joan Clifford, and she is an assistant professor of the practice in the Duke University Romance Studies Department. And she's also the director of community-based language initiatives in Duke Service Learning. She's committed to fostering community engagement. She teaches service learning courses and co-directs Duke Engage in Miami and the Global Education Summer Program in Alicante, Spain. She also coordinates the Languages in Durham website that showcases testimonials and research on various language communities living in North Carolina. She earned her PhD in Spanish from the University of Virginia and her MA in Spanish from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So Joan will speak to everyone first today, and we'll get started in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our second presenter as well, who will speak second after Joan. Holly Ackerman. Dr. Holly Ackerman is the librarian for Latin American, Iberian, and Latino Studies in the Duke Libraries Department of International and Area Studies. She is an active participant in the Seminar on the Acquisition of Latin American Library Materials and the Latin American Studies Association. She is the author of The Cuban Balseros, Voyage of Uncertainty, which established the foundational demography and history of the 1994 Cuban raft crisis. She has also published on various topics related to the Cuban diaspora and Caribbean migration. Her work has appeared in the journals Cuban Studies, Encuentro de la Cultura Cubana, and Latino Studies. She is a contributing editor and author in the award-winning collection of essays, Cuba. So welcome again to our viewers, and we'll get started with Joan Clifford.
Could we ask the people who are listening to send the language that they specialize in on the chat? Just
Yes.
so we
Sure.
know. Just a thought.
Do you want to read that?
We're good.
We have 2 Olas already, so I assume 2
Oh,
Spanish.
good. 2 Spanish
All right.
speakers.
Yes.
Great.
Well, I'm glad that we can be here to provide you with a little more of the logistics. What I'm going to do is spend some time going over the guidelines of the project, looking at the different topics, the type of evaluations that we're going to do, and then I'm going to try to offer you some strategies for how you can better prepare your students. So forgive me if some of this is repetition, but we thought that it might be useful just to really look at the overview of the entire project as you start preparing your students. So who can participate? This is the research paper PowerPoint, if they're able to consult it as I'm speaking, but you can also just listen without looking at it if it's not available to you. So teams of 2 to 3 students can participate, and students in level 3 or higher of world or heritage language courses. What we're looking for in the research paper is either an expository or an argumentative essay. There are different lengths depending on which language you're participating in. Spanish, French, German are 2 to 3 pages of actual content. Arabic is 1.5 to 2 pages. Chinese is 700 to 800 words. Japanese 700 to 800 words. And then in addition, beyond those page or word lengths, you also need to include a title page, which has the name of the research project, students' names, teachers' names, and the world or heritage language course in the school that the students are coming from. So that's an additional page beyond what we mentioned previously. The abstract is 250 words, and we're going to go over some details on what to include in the abstract coming up. In terms of references, Holly Ackerman is going to provide you with a lot of different ideas on good sources that you can access free of charge. So she'll follow up after I'm done. But you will need to ask your students to include 5 in-text citations. Those 5 quotations need to be from different sources, so you can have a minimum of 5 sources for your essay. 1 needs to be a primary source in any language, and 2 can be primary or secondary sources in the target language. And then obviously beyond that you can do different combinations. So if there are any problems with that type of distribution, just let us know. You can send us a question via chat as we go along, and we'll try to answer all your questions. So the final version of the essay, you have all the logistics in the various handouts provided, but just to remind you, you need to send a PDF version to the learning through languages at gmail.com account. And so you'll have all of the deadlines in the paperwork that's in your Google site. So let's take a moment to talk about what is appropriate formatting for the essay. We encourage you to look at the Purdue Online Writing Lab information because they have a lot of models and good information on APA style, which is the correct formatting that we're asking for. You need to have a title page, an abstract, main body, in-text citations and references, all applying the APA style. For French, German, and Spanish, just to clarify again, you need 12-point times New Roman font. All this information is in your site. Double-spaced 1-inch margins, Arabic is a 14-point Arabic font, double-spaced 1-inch margins. Chinese is 14-point Simpson font, double-spaced 1-inch margins. And the Japanese is the Geikonyushi style, forgive my pronunciation. There seems to be a question about where to find the...
It's posting instructions
Oh,
for them to find
perfect.
your PowerPoint, yeah.
Perfect. Just saw a message pop on by my screen. Okay, so what are the appropriate topics? It sounds like a few of you have already turned in titles for your student essays, which is great, meaning that you have already kind of zeroed in, or your students have zeroed in on a topic. But just to look at those very quickly, there are 4 regions of research that are available to all different languages: contemporary Asia, contemporary Europe, contemporary Latin America and the Caribbean, contemporary Middle East, and North Africa. And you can do any kind of combination. Spanish doesn't only have to work in Latin America and the Caribbean. Possible topics. There's quite a list available to you in the documentation. Just to give you some ideas: domestic or foreign policies, migration-related issues, preservation of or changes in cultural practices, and environmental concerns. So we encourage you to look at the suggested research topics in the site. You may be wondering how the content is evaluated. There are rubrics available to you, but here are the highlights. So you need to consider all aspects of the project, make sure that they're represented in the essay. You need to have the appropriate breadth of coverage, appropriate topic. The content needs to be relevant to the purpose of the paper. The abstract needs to be clear and concise. The support for the thesis is complete and displays depth of ability. Clear and appropriate organization, and we're going to talk about more strategies for organization and transitions in just a moment. Inclusion and appropriate formatting of the 5 in-text citations. So again, make sure that there is a distribution of both English and target language citations. So what are some good organizing strategies? You need to be thinking about how to coach your students to both look for transitions between paragraphs and also transitions within the paragraphs. It could be words or phrases, it could be anything that's helping anticipate what's coming up, what's comparing, what's contrasting, what's going on within the content. And we have a link for the Writing Center at UNC on the slides of the PowerPoint that provide some useful suggestions. On the following slide, there's just a sample of some types of expressions that are commonly used for transitions. Obviously, according to your target language, you would need to adjust what's appropriate. Within Spanish, we did place in the Google site some documents that outline good discursive markers to use in Spanish, and we're hoping that some other language colleagues at UNC and within Duke are going to continue to upload some resources for you to the Google site. So Emily's going to continue to work with that, but please review what's available to you already. There's a breadth of resources, including some on transitions. Okay, so the following slide is targeting the question, how is language evaluated? Again, check your rubric, but these are the highlights. To use a consistent and appropriate writing style, excellent grammar, meaning that it has typical errors for the level of the student. It does not need to be completely error-free. It just needs to have appropriate types of errors according to the level. Vocabulary is varied and appropriate for the topic. There are well-formed connections within and between the paragraphs. There are few spelling errors, and there's appropriate punctuation and capitalization. So how should students use dictionaries and translation tools? There's a lot of debate about what is appropriate use. We encourage you to consider recommending both wordreference.com and lingui.com as good sites, free sites, where you can have your students do direct translations of words. But as we know, it's also important to have them reading in the target language so that they can find the appropriate vocabulary according to the content. A lot of times we know that students have trouble figuring out the part of speech that's appropriate, and they come up with some interesting combinations of words simply because they're trying to literally translate and they cannot use their dictionary appropriately. So in wordreference.com, there are some language forums that help try to decipher the context of certain phrases and words. So we encourage you to make your students aware of that as a resource. And then there are also some online sources that help to find synonyms of words, and that's also something to consider to encourage variety of both forms of language and vocabulary as well. So what goes into picking a good title? There are three things that we want to highlight. Predicts content, it catches the reader's interest, and it reflects the tone or the slant of the paper. And I've, in the slides, identified a few ideas that might help your students generate titles that are of interest. You can have them write a question beginning with is or do or how or why. You can pick out of the essay a concrete image, something that the reader can hear or say, or see or taste or smell or feel, and work off of that image somehow. You can have them as a team build one word, 2 words, 3 words into the title and make it more of a game as to adding appropriate words. That sometimes creates very original patterns. And then you can also consider suggesting that they combine 2 very short titles. Perhaps each member of the group can propose a title, and there's some way to merge them together. So if you want to look at the Duke Thompson Writing Program website, that is also a good source of ideas of how to help your students generate titles. There's some documents there that could be of use. So in terms of an appropriate thesis statement, this particular project could either be expository or argumentative. So here are 2 examples. If you're working on the issue of reforestation in Latin America, the students could look at which kinds of efforts have been executed and their effects, or the students could make a case for the most effective method of reforestation. So you can either be descriptive or you can be argumentative, but the thesis needs to really target the direction of how the students are going to develop the content. The thesis needs to be very concise, meaning you don't want a very broad thesis because it's really not that long of a paper, so it can't develop many arguments, many examples within the length that's allowed for the submission. In order to brainstorm a bit about how to focus the thesis, I've supplied a few fill-in-the-blank phrases that appear on the Vanderbilt Writing Program website, such as, in this paper, I argue that X because of Y. Or, while critics argue X, I argue Y because of blank. So there are a couple other phrases there that might inspire students to really put together their ideas and to try to narrow down the topic into a workable thesis statement. What the abstract should include, remember the abstract is about 250 words. There are 3 parts that are generally suggested, including the reason for writing, what's the importance of that research topic, what's the scope of the project, what's the main claim. The second important piece of the abstract is the evidence, what kind of evidence, the types that you're going to cover in your research, and then finally have the students include some sort of conclusion. How does this work add to the knowledge on the topic, and what are the conclusions that the students are going to come to in the essay. Okay, so that is kind of the overview of what I had to offer, and just to remind you that there should be resources for the majority of languages in the Google site, and we're working on providing you with more in the next few weeks. But if there's anyone with a question now, we have some time for you to type in to the chat any questions that you might have.
And maybe they could all also put their language.
We did have one. Would you like me to go ahead and read it now or at the end? You said
We have a few minutes before, we can go ahead and do that question.
sure.
Yeah.
The question, Joan, was that I heard from last year's participants that you have put all languages together during the final grading process. I don't know if you want to address that, Emily or Joan?
Sure. Yes. Thanks for your question. Yes, we do grade, or we do score all the different projects individually, but according to the same rubric. You can see the guidelines, depending on the language, are slightly different because of the way that different languages are learned. But the rubric is the same for all, and teams are judged against the other teams within their same track. And remember, the tracks are the regional, the regional focus. The tracks are Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, or the Middle East and North Africa. So we do have within each one of those tracks at least 2 languages, if not more.
We had a follow-up to that one.
Okay, we'll take one more. We'll take one more question now, and then maybe we'll come back and have more time for Q&A at about 5:15.
We actually have one follow-up to that question and then a new question. Do you want me to?
Okay, let's take those 2. and
Okay.
then- yeah.
The follow-up to the last question was, I just want to remind that Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic are Category 4 languages, and it would make more sense if you have a winner in each language instead of comparing Chinese with Spanish papers. I know you mentioned a little bit about the languages, but maybe we could clarify a little more about how, even though it's the same rubric, we scale differently for different languages.
Yes, that's exactly right. So we do try to take into consideration, as well as have judges, and we do give a training to our judges to have them take into consideration the differences in the different language levels. So the same difficulty is not expected of an Arabic 3 student as a Spanish 3 student. Ultimately the level of the student is not, we're not looking at the particular course level of the student. So we have debated this a lot and discussed it, and so we did decide to maintain the regional tracks as the sort of unit against which all the students would be judged against each other. There are some prizes that are also overall, where we're looking at all the students who are participating.
And the last one I think is pretty quick. Should the abstract be written in both the target language and English?
That's a great question, and the abstract only needs to be written in the target language. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your questions. We will have more time for questions in about 20 minutes. Thank you to Joan for these resources. So I hope that was helpful, and also I just want to add that both of our speakers will be available by email if you have follow-up questions specific to either one of them as well. So thank you all, and we're going to continue with Dr. Holly Ackerman.
Hi. Thank you, Emily and Joan and Noel, for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. And so I want to start with a little bit of advice as far as what you might be able to do to help the students. And I would say contact your local librarian so that that person, your school librarian, so that that person can be available to help. Even if they don't know the languages, they'll be able to help with things like getting through a website. Oftentimes students will go to a suggested resource and they'll say, gee, I don't know how to search here. Or they get stuck with questions about what keywords should I use or something like that. And so the local librarian, even if they don't speak the language, can be a good resource. Then the other thing is, my contact information will be available for you, and within the limits of my time, I'm always happy to respond to questions. If students are stuck trying to find materials, or if you have a question as far as how to guide them to things, I'm always happy to help. So don't hesitate to contact me. Then all of the things that I'm going to be talking about today will be open access materials. So they're things, open access means that they're things that are freely available on the internet. And they've been selected as well for their quality. So in this PowerPoint, which is available to you, you're going to have lots of things that you can use. And it's divided into two types. First, things that would be helpful no matter what the language, and then things that are specific to each one of the languages in the competition. And I wonder if you all could now, in the chat line, send the language that you're teaching. Because if there are only 3 languages represented in the audience, there's no sense in my going over 6 or 7. So if you would just write in whatever your particular language is. And then Noel can tell me.
Spanish.
It's a race. Oh, look, it's coming up. Chinese, Spanish. Okay. We'll see the others as they come along. So then within each specific language, there are 2 types of materials that I've put. Basically, newspaper sources and then academic journals. And so the difference there is going to be the newspapers are going to have shorter articles dealing with Arabic, okay, the current events, and the journal articles are going to be longer and they're going to be denser. So you'll decide what it is that your students can handle. If we move into the resources then, things for all the languages. Joan mentioned word reference, and in lots of the university language courses, that's the program that they suggest that students use when they're looking words up, when they're looking for context, when they want a forum where they can say, I don't know which word to use here, that kind of thing. Word reference is very good for that. Then I also put Google Translate, just because everybody uses it, even if they say they don't. And Babla, which is a series of online dictionaries from English to 28 other languages. And it also has other types of materials, things about customs in countries and that sort of thing. Then I won't go through the grammar and language guides, but if they want online grammar and language guides, I've put some of the principal ones: the U.S. Foreign Service, the British Broadcasting Company, and a site called Forvo that has a pronunciation guide, so you can get a native speaker pronouncing a word if you need to know how to do it. Then students may need a country guide to get background about the country that they're going to be writing about, or the region they're going to be writing about. I've put 3 different ones. The Library of Congress in the United States does a series of country studies. Then I put a commercial service, but that's free. It's that does country profiles. And then the U.S. State Department does background notes on countries, and it also does travel advisories. So it tells you something about what's happening within that country and whether that limits or facilitates your travel. Then I've put 2 portal suggestions. I'll talk about Google first. If you go to Google and you click on this grid-like thing that's in the upper right-hand corner, you can then, how do I go back here to my PowerPoint? Oh, all right. You can select languages and input tools, and you can say, I want my Google results to be in Arabic and English, or only in Arabic. And you can change it permanently, or you can change it temporarily. And one of the things that's happened is on Google, they're now, it now is sort of the only way to find certain types of materials. A lot of librarians will tell you, oh, never use Google. But it used to be that think tanks around the world, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, things like that, that would print reports, and we would buy their reports and put them in the library. They no longer print them at all. They only put them online. So there are certain very good sources of material that you will only be able to find, or you will most easily find, by going to Google. And then you just tell the students to put in the keyword, the country that they're working on, the subject they're working on, and something like report or study or investigation, and it will bring up lots of really good government documents and think tank documents. And if you change the language, and so, for example, my language is Spanish, so if you put investigación or reporte or estudio, or the equivalent in whatever your language is, you'll get lots of materials that way. And then I put the Europeana website, which is the portal that goes into the European Union. So it not only has things about the European Union, but it has things from each individual country, and it has them in many languages. So people can go and get reports on European interaction with the world and get it in different languages. If you have questions as I go along, just send them in. We'll be happy to hear them. So freely available scholarly articles in multiple languages. There's something called the Open Access Directory of Journals, and it's part of a movement in academia to make high-quality academic information available freely to everyone in the world. And so there are 9,000 journals in several different languages. I went through, and there are a couple of the languages in this competition that are not in the Open Access Directory. I think it's either Japanese or Chinese. I think it's Japanese that isn't represented, but the others are. And then I put a couple of international organizations with published reports, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. Of course, you would probably want to go to the UN also. So then if we go to the specific languages, there'll be more on Spanish because there are more students in the competition who are doing that language, and it's my language. But there's some equivalent for each one of the languages. So to find academic articles, if they want academic articles, there are two government websites, one in Mexico and one in Brazil, where they've put together hundreds, and I think in the Brazilian one now it's thousands of academic journals from the region. So they're academic articles on contemporary subjects in all fields that are published throughout Latin America. And with Cielo, it's the Brazilian government that's put it together. And with Red Alic, it's the Mexican government. But if you click on those, you'll be taken to a search page, and you would have to search in Spanish, and all of the results will be in Spanish. But it's a great source if you're telling them that you want them to have some of their primary sources and their secondary sources to be in the language. And I guess I could say a word about the searching. With each one of these library things, there's a little bit of variation on search pages from one place to another. And really, the best way to deal with that is to learn to just experiment and to go and realize that the first thing you have to do is to find out how to search in that place. Rather than thinking, I'm going to go straight in here and immediately find the materials I want, you need to go straight in and experiment a little with how you find things on that website. And then for a free internet site with materials about Latin America, there's something called LANIC, which is at the University of Texas. And the whole purpose of LANIC was to look for websites in Latin America that had information that would be valuable to university students. And the University of Texas stopped updating LANIC in 2015. So nothing has been added since then, and broken links have not been fixed. It's one of the problems with it, but you can go in there and you can go country by country, you can go issue by issue, and you can find, for example, every ministry of every country in Latin America. So if you were studying the environment or public health or crime, whatever, you could go in there, you could click on the country, and there'll be a very logically organized list of things by area. So it's a great site, even though it's unfortunate that it's not being kept up. It's still a wonderful resource. Then there's something called the Digital Library of the Caribbean, which is a lot of libraries in the Caribbean and a lot of universities in the United States that have come together to put primary documents having to do with the circum-Caribbean area. So it doesn't take in all of Latin America, but it does take in Mexico and most of Central America, Colombia, Venezuela, as well as all the islands of the Caribbean and South Florida. So then I've put a listing of newspapers that gives you Spanish language newspapers in the United States, Spanish language newspapers in Latin America, and Spanish language newspapers in Spain, because I know they'll have topics that have to do with Latinos in the US or topics that have to do with Latin American countries, so we've got all of that. And then I put a few of the major think tanks, and I realized as I look at that list that I didn't put one called Insight Crime, but I'll add that. Insight Crime is looking at organized crime in Latin America. It's a fabulous website. It's got all sorts of investigations and information. If they want any kind of demographic information about people of Hispanic descent in the United States, the Pew Hispanic Trust has wonderful resources. The Washington Office on Latin America has been advocating on social issues in Latin America with the U.S. Congress for many years, and so they have a series of reports that go back to the 1980s about conditions in Latin America, and the same with CLACSA. So moving now to things that are not so much my language, I met with my colleagues in the Department of International and Area Studies who do all of these different languages and asked them to give me at least 2 major sources, one for academic journals and one for newspapers, so that you'll have resources for your students. And so the French government has done something called Gallica, which is a digital library that contains all sorts of journal articles. It's got electronic books, it's got magazines, and then I've put several sources for newspapers in French. Japanese, I was surprised at the number of sources, because I thought it, you know, not speaking Japanese, I don't know, I thought it was going to be more complex. But so I've put the major newspapers and the Foreign Press Center. The Japanese government has organized a center since the 1970s to help foreign journalists who are coming to the country. So it gives country information, it gives current issues, it tells how to find information on particular themes, so it's a great resource for your folks. And then a series of the major newspapers in the country. And there are 2 important sites with social and political information, one that contains 4 different databases that have to do with the history and social and political issues in Japan since World War II. The first social research institute, and their records particularly having to do with labor issues. And that site provides links to all of the Japanese political parties, and then all of their resources then become available to you, as well as many of the major think tanks and research institutes in Japan. It gives links to them, and as well as their own database. So what were the languages in the end? So,
Arabic. Go
Oh
ahead.
yeah, we had Arabic, Spanish, and Chinese, and then we also had the one question too that came in as well. I didn't know. Do you
okay.
wanna-
So Chinese and Arabic we should just look at. I put Chinese newspapers online. I put the Hong Kong newspapers. The central television station, the international television station of the Chinese government, has a lot of current event shows and information online. I put that. A national database of academic articles from Taiwan. And then a site that just shows a lot of free websites and databases on Chinese studies. German, we don't have anybody, and then Arabic. So my colleague who does the Middle East suggested to me that we just limit ourselves to 2 newspapers, because he said the one in Cairo is the most important newspaper in the region, and that it covers the entire region, and that Al Jazeera, which most of us have heard of, is a strong competitor, and so we have those 2 sites. Then a guide to Muslims in America, which has a lot of different freely available sources. And then a portal with news, a variety of news-related resources. An open access set of journals called Amir. So I'm going to stop there and hear what your questions were. And again, if you wind up stuck or your students are stuck and they need to find things, don't hesitate to contact me. So what was
Great. We had one question.
Let me read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question we had was, should direct quotes originally in English be translated to the target language? Should they be used at all?
Okay.
So that's more for you.
So, an answer to that question, your students can use quotes in English, and they do not need to be translated to maintain the integrity of the original words. But we would just ask that they didn't put an abundance of quotes in English, maybe 2 or 3 at most. So yes, that's the answer to that question. If y'all have more for any of us. Well, I want to say, okay, here we
have
go.
one coming.
Okay, good.
Okay, gracias. And then the next question, I missed the first 15 minutes and I'm checking the PowerPoint now. It says that there are 33 teams in total. For Chinese groups, there are only 3. Are those numbers are for the current year, right?
Yes.
Yes, they are current for the current year. But there might be, that's the target language, the tracks could be different. So there might be more people researching Chinese subjects, but that's 3 teams doing the presentation in Chinese language.
Yes, we have 9 teams. We have 9 teams in each track right now. We had a lot of applications, which was very exciting. I believe we had 73. So we could only accept around half of those teams. So yes, you again, we divide the tracks by region and not by language. So your students will compete, but in a fair way against students of other languages.
We had a follow-up too also. May I know how many teams are researching East Asian region?
We do, well, within Asia, so you're asking within specifically East Asia, or within Asia, how many are doing East Asia? We don't have everyone's topics yet, so we don't know yet, but
we don't really control
share.
that. Yeah. We don't really subdivide within we control the number to have a max within each large region, but we don't, like in Europe, we also don't pay attention to or regulate the numbers of East versus West. That's really up to the team, so we don't control that part of it. So there could be all East Asia or no East Asia.
That's right. And also it's fine for teams to have overlapping topics as well. That happens, and that's fine. You all have the suggested research topics which Joan pointed out again, and so some folks use those topics and some don't, and it's fine either way. We don't penalize your students for using those topics or not. Do you all have other questions about having your students conduct the research or the product or the process of writing? Any questions you have are welcome. And just to reiterate also, all of our judges are very skilled in the language, and the majority of them also teach that language, so they are very familiar with the process of teaching and the different levels of students in that target language.
And also to reverberate, we will post the PowerPoint for a few people who joined us late. We will post the entire PowerPoint, so you're welcome to go back and look at it later if there was something you might have missed. We know there was also a lot of information.
Well, I am going to do a very late introduction. I'm Emily Chavez, the Outreach Program Coordinator for the UNC Duke Consortium in Latin American and Caribbean Studies. I'm part of the planning team for this wonderful program, now in its 3rd year. And the voice you're hearing is Noel Bynum from the UNC Center for European Studies. So we are available to answer your questions as they arrive in the month of November. As we get into that, and your students will probably be engaging in their research all month. So we'll wait maybe another couple of minutes, and also to reiterate, Holly and Joan are available by email. They put together so many great resources, and that resources and the Google folder resources and I'm sorry, it's called research and writing resources. That has several documents in it that are available to you and your students. So please look at them. Most of them are for Spanish right now. There's a book about teaching Arabic writing in Arabic, and then we will also be, hopefully adding some more resources. There's one about conducting searches, and so that may be also a helpful guide for any students of any language, and all of that is within that participant portal that you all have access to. Well, we thank you all so very much for being a part of this. We're really excited to see you guys and your students in December. So stay in touch. Happy researching, happy writing, happy teaching, and we will talk to you soon. All right. Thanks.